Good morning. It's so nice to be back with you all. What a blessing. Thank you for having me back. My name is Alex, for those of you who haven't seen me before. This is my second time here. I was delighted to come in the spring, and it's wonderful to be back. I'm from Massachusetts, so drove a little ways to be here. I'm so happy that this is happening. So the last time I was here, I talked with you all about what it really means to be a welcoming congregation. I talked about how being welcoming is not just about being friendly. It's about figuring out how we define us and working to expand that definition. Ultimately, it's about practicing what it would be like to be a community and eventually a world in which there is no us and them, just us. That actually, in essence, is what beloved community means. No more us and them, just us. Are you still into it? Are you still on board? I hope so. I also invited you the last time I was here to try on 3 really important spiritual practices that help us do this, help us practice expanding our welcome. Do you remember what they were? You didn't know there was going to be a quiz. Well, I'll remind you. The first was the spiritual practice of pausing. Pausing and breathing, particularly when something catches us up and creates a strong reaction in us. Allowing ourselves to explore with curiosity what's going on inside. Choosing to focus with care on the humanity of those involved. Pausing. The second was the spiritual practice of being willing to actively take on discomfort, knowing that the way oppression functions is that the comfort of one group depends on the suffering of another group. Alleviating that suffering requires those who are comfortable to get uncomfortable, creating the possibility for someone else to shift out of pain. Actively taking on discomfort. The third was the spiritual practice of constantly seeking out barriers to inclusion within ourselves and within our community as a whole, and working to remove them. Have you been practicing? I know you have, because I've been hearing about all the phenomenal stuff that you all have been engaged in the last 8 months. Challenging stuff, uncomfortable stuff, yeah? No? Well, I feel like what I've heard begs to differ. And that's why I'm back, because I know you're ready to take things to the next level. You're already doing it. Am I right? Are you ready? Some people are like, I don't know. Well, I hope you are, because I'm here because of it. So the last time I was here, I told you about the most welcoming experience I've ever had when I joined the Boston Gay Men's Chorus. Who remembers my story about that? Yay! It's okay if you weren't here last time. That's why I'm doing this recap. It's perfectly fine. But this time, I want to get really real with you all and talk about the fact that I've never experienced that kind of welcome, that feeling of true belonging in a Unitarian Universalist church. Now, I've been a UU for 27 years, since my parents joined a UU church when I was 6. I was raised in that church. It was a good place to grow up. I credit it, in large part, with the fact that today I am able to be my full, authentic self. My queer, gender fluid, flamboyantly masculine and feminine all at one time, neither here nor there, Mary Martin as Peter Pan, bow tie flashing, motorcycle riding, BOI boy. Thank you. Because I was raised in a UU church, I don't have the sort of religious trauma that my queer and trans friends and comrades do, so many of them. But simply allowing me to exist and not actively making it harder for me to be myself in the world was not enough for me to feel a sense of unconditional welcome and belonging in my home church. Nor have I ever felt that way in the dozens of UU churches I've been to since. Why? I was raised here. This is my religion. Why don't I feel like I fully belong? The reason, I think, is really beautifully illustrated by a framework from Reverend Canon Stephanie Spellers, an Episcopal priest. The idea is that there are 3 types of welcome: invitation, inclusion, and incarnation, or radical welcome. Invitation is represented by the open door. Everyone's welcome. Come on in. But the expectation is that everyone who comes in will adapt to the existing expectations and norms for who we are and how we do things here. If people can't assimilate, they'll eventually leave. Inclusion, or incorporation, is represented by the desire for diversity without real culture shift. So efforts are made to include marginalized people, and we might incorporate new projects like an annual LGBT youth prom, or a yearly gospel service, or a monthly Spanish language potluck. But the larger structures of our community and its norms and expectations remain unchanged, meaning that we sometimes see a sort of revolving door of people with marginalized identities, but they generally don't experience true belonging. Incarnation, or radical welcome, is so much more. It's what happens when we are willing to be changed by what we've started. Radical welcome is about mutual relationship and the ability to be transformed by those relationships. With radical welcome, we ensure that marginalized perspectives, values, and gifts influence the very core of who we are, that all people who are part of our community see themselves fully reflected, not just in the the community itself, but also in our leadership and in the culture that we co-create together. I can't find a congregational home in Unitarian Universalism because as a queer and trans person, I need incarnation, radical welcome. Invitation is being invited into a church, but not being able to use the bathroom when I get there because there's no gender-neutral option. It's hearing a worship leader divide singers into women's parts and men's parts instead of just higher and lower voices. It's having people I encounter make assumptions about what pronouns they should use for me or what gender my partner is. When these sorts of things happen to me, I am rendered invisible. When I come to church, if I feel like I'm not supposed to exist in that space, I'm gonna have a really hard time getting my spiritual needs met. Inclusion is being able to at least exist in a church because there's a bathroom I can use and efforts have been made to use language that doesn't divide everyone up into ladies and gentlemen or brothers and sisters, but maybe I'm the only person like me. Maybe the leaders of the church are unwilling to use the word queer because they're afraid it might offend other church members. With inclusion, I'm reminded every Sunday that I'm different, and that being different means I don't quite fit in. So I can come to church, but I can never completely feel like I really belong. And I certainly can't feel like I can bring my chosen family to church with me. My partner, who's queer and trans, and also disabled and working class. My sister and her immigrant husband and multilingual child. My best friend, who's queer and trans and also Black and Southern, and really loves Jesus. Incarnation, or radical welcome, is a church that says, Alex, what does queer and trans Unitarian Universalism look like? If you were a leader here, what would you do differently? What is your biggest, brightest hope for spiritual community, and how can we make it happen together? Radical welcome and constantly asks who's on the margins and relocates those experiences to the center instead. Radical welcome is a church where I don't just feel accepted, I feel valued, not despite my differences, but because of them. The only time I've ever gotten a taste of radical welcome within Unitarian Universalism was when I was a teenager. And things were hard as a teen. I didn't have language yet to describe who I was, to myself or to anyone else. I struggled with depression and anxiety. UU Youth Space was my saving grace. We didn't always get it right, but we were constantly practicing radical welcome as best we could. In those spaces, I truly felt unconditional love. There were 3 constants when we worshiped as UU Youth. We co-created it, we always worshiped in the round, and oral tradition songs provided the bedrock. When we got together, someone would say, okay, who wants to plan worship? And a bunch of people would go off and make a plan together, collaboratively. We always worshiped in a circle, and we often sat on the ground with the chalice in the middle, and we held hands or sat close, touching each other. We sang. We never once used a hymnal or a piano. We sang rounds and counterpoints and made up harmonies, and no one ever knew when the song would end. It just ended when it was done. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine worshiping that way? How embodied it was. There was no thinking. It was about feeling and being together. Can you imagine what it was like for me to supposedly grow up and be expected to worship with the adults, with their rows of chairs and their hierarchical leadership and their hymnals and their orders of service? I'll never forget being 17 years old when the youth group was invited to do a youth-led service. A lot of UU churches have a practice of letting the youth lead a service once a year. All we wanted to do was put the chairs in a circle, because that's how we worshiped. We couldn't do it any other way. But the adults said no. Not because there were box pews or the chairs were nailed to the floor, because they weren't willing to change. Not even for one single Sunday. They weren't willing to do something different, something possibly uncomfortable in service of us. 6 years ago, I heard UU minister Reverend Rob Hardy's preach on the topic, willing to be changed by what we've started. And I was immediately transported back to being 17 and feeling that sense of rejection over the damn chairs. Young, growing God, eager still to know, willing to be changed by what you've started, quick to be delighted, singing as you go. I thought to myself, what if the youth knew more deeply what it meant to be UU and practice Unitarian Universalism than the adults who found this faith later in life? What if those of us who were raised here understood something deeper and more true about this religion and were just waiting for the chance to share and take all of us to the next level? We have to be willing, not just to welcome change, but to be changed, to transform. I'm not 17 anymore, and there are a lot more reasons than chairs in rows now that keep me from finding a congregational home. Being queer and trans doesn't just mean I have particular needs around gender and sexuality. It means that my cultural context is different from the culture of the average UU church. Being queer and trans affects everything for me. My understanding of family, my relationship to social justice, the ways I build my community, my sense of spirituality, my spiritual needs. Being queer and trans means that today I am carrying a great weight on my heart. Today I am holding the heaviness of 22 beautiful lives lost this year in this country to anti-trans violence, and hundreds more lost around the world. Tomorrow is Transgender Day of Remembrance, a day of mourning and witness for those we have lost, and the fact that almost all of them are trans women of color. I need a church where I can bring this burden, where I can cry deep, racking sobs and be held. I need a church where I can sing my heart out at full volume and feel my energy flowing out of my body and connecting me with everyone else in the room and down to the earth itself. I need a church where I can be not only queer and trans, but also a young adult and polyamorous and kinky and financially insecure and affected by AIDS. I need a place where I can bring my chosen and given family and all their diversity of belief, race, class, ability, gender, sexuality, and age. All of these things are deeply tied to my queerness and my transness. I can't leave any of them at the door. In order for me to feel radical welcome, in order for me to feel home in a church, even the church of my birth, that church must be willing to not just change, but be changed, be transformed. Last weekend, I did a workshop, a lot like the one I'm going to offer here, right here, in this room, right after the service, if you can stay for it. And someone said, with trepidation in his voice, "It sounds like what you're describing with radical welcome means being in a constant state of transformation. That sounds really hard." And I said, yes! That's exactly what radical welcome is. And it is hard. And it's terrifying at times. And it's definitely uncomfortable. But it's worth it. The caterpillar can't become a butterfly without terrifying transformation. The child can't be born without a painful labor. And the spiritual community cannot meet the needs of each other, much less our world, without being willing to be changed by what we've started. Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams said that change just means becoming bigger, stronger versions of ourselves. But being changed, transformation, means a destruction of our current selves so that something new might be born in its place. It means letting go of everything that feels safe and comfortable with nothing more than faith that we can become something so much more. This does sound potentially terrible. And you might be thinking, nuh-uh, no way, I did not sign up for being on my own, struggling with discomfort and trying to figure out how the heck to make wings grow out of my fuzzy caterpillar back. But friends, the good news is that this is why we're here, in community. Anyone who has ever experienced deep pain or oppression knows that part of living in the midst of that is learning how to feel both joy and hardship simultaneously. Am I right? The good news is that it is in the coming together to do the hard things and hold the discomfort and struggle together that the joy is found. Are you willing to be changed by what you've started here? Imagine the thing that brings you the most comfort about this congregation. Maybe it's something you feel like you have in common with everyone else here. Maybe it's a particular ritual within the standard Sunday service. Maybe it's the building itself. What brings you immense comfort about this place? Are you willing to give that thing up in service of transformation? What if a group of people who need Unitarian Universalism were to say to you, in order for us to get our spiritual needs met, we need you to let go of that thing and welcome a whole different thing, something unfamiliar, unknown, uncomfortable? Could you do it? Could you let go of your attachment to that thing that is meaningful to you and be curious about what might happen if you did? That's what radical welcome looks like. That's what welcome as a spiritual practice truly means. Y'all knew I wasn't gonna get up here and tell you something easy. But like I said, I am not asking you to do this alone. That's why this community of faith exists, to hold each other and support each other in transcending our current forms. I'm not inviting you to a process of drudgery and no fun and never being comfortable again. I'm inviting you to a process of coming together, of holding it all together. The hardship, the discomfort, and the wonder and joy. And together, finding incredible connection in the process of being changed. You can do this. I know you can. You already are. So the next time you feel uncomfortable or resistant to some sort of change here, think about what's at stake. Our world is at stake. Queer and trans and black and brown and disabled and immigrant lives are at stake. Our children are at stake. Reach deep within yourself. Reach out to each other. Welcome the discomfort and the unknowing, and have faith in the power of transformation. Amen. Ashe, and blessed be.